Me as Councilmember Falcone and Councilmember Schneider. Today's meeting is devoted to the fiscal year 2010 balancing and adjustment actions, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bob Samario.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Samario, Interim Finance Director, and today we are going to be talking about 2010 balancing adjustments. And this is really a review, in a sense, from the presentation we gave to the full City Council back on September 3rd. We had a special work session where we wanted to, at that time, identify what we measured as a projected shortfall in the general fund for 2010, just a few months after the budget adoption in June. And at that time, we mentioned that we were going to come back to you a few months later with the actual adjustments, the technical adjustments to make those changes. We had talked about a number of proposed adjustments from departments to as one of the measures to provide or to address the revenue shortfall that we'll see in a moment. And so at this point, we're going to just present these as recommended adjustments to you folks, which we'll take to council later today. So with that. Again, I want to just review again the revenue shortfalls, what's caused our shortfall for this current year, just a few months after year end of last year, our strategy to address those shortfalls, and then we also want to talk about a couple of fee resolutions that we'd like to amend. So first, looking at revenues, you'll see that our sales taxes this year were budgeted in the adopted budget of $18.1 million. That was based on sales taxes that we had received through December 15, 2008, and that information we received in March. Remember, it's 3 months in arrears, and the State Department of Finance's estimates, and those are the original estimates that they provided to us in January of 2009. You'll see that now we have revised that estimate down by over $1 million, almost $1.1 million, based on not only what we saw in the latter part of 2009, but also a revised State Department of Finance set of estimates, which were received in May, just a few weeks before we adopted the budget. So you can see that while we budgeted 1.4% decline this year, we are now projecting a 3.5% decline. And you can just real quickly see that the original letter we got from the Department of Finance, quarter by quarter, what they were projecting in terms of essentially declines in our sales taxes quarter by quarter. They did project that June 30, 2010, we would have a 3.1% growth. In May, those numbers were substantially revised downward, 14.4%, and as you'll see a double star there, the actual revenues came in at 16.2% for that quarter. We won't know the September quarter until late December, around the 18th, so we're hopeful that it's at least better than the 11.5 that the State Department of Finance is projecting. Interestingly, they're projecting for the quarter ended December 31st that it'd be flat, 0%, and then go back to a negative before it returns to growth in June to 30, 2010. Our bed tax, we get that monthly. As you know, we had our adopted budget indicated or projected a 3% decline for a total of $12 million. We have since revised that estimate to almost $4 million, so revised decline of 5.6%, which results in a shortfall of $675,000 in relation to the adopted budget. And just to look at it in more detail, this is a table that you kind of see in our city administrator's newsletter. And just to remind you, we presented in September that we had 11 straight months of declines from September 2008 till July 2009, which was obviously unprecedented. And for the last 3 months, we had assumed a 5.9% decline, and still it wasn't enough. You can see that it was double digits for 2 of those months. And in July, we assumed an 8% decline, and it declined 14.6%. And you can see that for the remainder of the year, we have made some projections, and I want to look at that in a little more detail. You can see that month by month, which is unusual for us. We usually do it at the macro or annual level. We've now projected our growth for TOT month by month. For August, we assumed a 23.1% decline, and then starting to diminish in terms of those declines, where we would see it flatten out or level off starting in December, and then some growth by the end of the year. For August, you can see that we actually did a little bit better. We were only down 19%, and we did a little bit better in September. We're only down almost 8% in relation to a 10% projection. So we're actually going to be starting to see the October month trickle in the next few days. It's due by the 10th of this month, so we're hoping that it does at least better than a 5% decline. And then the property tax, it's the original adopted budget was based on some estimates that we got from the county. They indicated that we would be seeing a 3% increase at the time. Just shortly before budget adoption, they gave us a revised estimate that it would be up only 0.8%. And so based on that revised projection, we are projecting a $433,000 shortfall. I will tell you that we have a little bit of concern with the property taxes because the annual adjustment to property taxes are based on CPI, and CPI has been trending downward. We've seen some negative declines in CPI, and they base their assessment on the October to October CPI. And so if that's actually a negative number, we could see them revising property taxes and what they assessed downward by that amount. It still won't account for any upticks in revenues caused by sales, but right now we're not seeing a lot of sales that would cause the assessments to go up, so we're kind of watching that closely.
Ms. Falcone?
Just in that you're talking about the CPI, Bob, one of the things that we haven't factored in or hasn't been factored in to any of these numbers is the possibility of a PERS hit when the CPI goes down, our contribution levels go up. Is that pretty
Mr. Chair,
accurate?
Ms. Falcone, the PERS rates that we're expecting to see go up are going to be in 2012, and they are based. Those rates that we pay are always 3 years in arrears.
Right.
So
It lags by 3 years.
So they're going to be based on investment gains or losses in this case through June 30, 2009 and 10. And as you know, 2009 was a really bad year for the stock market, lost a lot of money. So those impacts we will see in 2012 for the first time. So that's to be the first time we'll see the impacts of those investment losses.
Understood, but the variation in the CPI is also a factor in that formula, is it not?
They make assumptions about what the increases to salary and benefits will be.
Right.
And so to the degree that we are under or over that, then of course that gets factored in. But it's not really a CPI measurement. It's really just what they assume that there'll be increases from just merit increases and the like for salaries.
Thank you.
And just as a correction for property taxes, I mentioned the CPI going down. That will impact next year's property tax revenues, not this year. This is the only thing that will affect this year, up or down, will be how supplemental taxes come in. You know, changes in property ownership that will affect the assessed values. Now, utility users tax, it's a very volatile revenue. We had budgeted a 2.5% growth. We have now revised it down to 1%. That's a $325,000 loss. Year to date, we're down 1.25%, so even worse than the 1% we have revised. But it could change quarter by quarter. So it's volatile, particularly those that are tied to commodities, natural gas, electricity. So we're going to keep an eye on that one. We're not sure exactly where it's going to end this year. And then lastly, the COPS grant, as you know, we did not get that money to fund the 4 positions we had anticipated or hoped for at least. So in total, you could see that we are expecting a shortfall this year of $2.9 million, almost $3 million. And so our approach, and we've talked about this again already, so this is again a review. Our strategy and the features of the strategy that we had proposed and talked about was that we wanted to avoid further use of general fund policy reserves. As you know, our budgetary reserve is down. We're fully funded in our disaster reserve, but we wanted to avoid using any more of those reserves. We also wanted to avoid any employee layoffs, which we were successful with. And in the past, we've kind of looked at allocating some of these adjustments across the board to departments. And in this case, we looked at each adjustment in kind of in priority order and department in priority order, and we kind of looked at them in that manner rather than an across-the-board approach. And in that manner, we were able to take advantage of savings where they're available, primarily with positions. Some departments had more positions that were vacant than others, and so we took advantage of those savings. We didn't eliminate the positions, but we just reduced or proposing to reduce the budget for those salary and benefit dollars. And again, another feature was that we wanted to minimize service level impacts. So again, there's a recap of the total revenue shortfalls we're projecting as of this point, almost $3 million, and then the recommended balancing strategy. The general fund departmental adjustments represent most of that, almost $1.6 million, and about $1.3 million of that represents positions that are vacant that we're going to, again, capture the savings from. Other items include rebate from internal service funds. It's primarily our vehicle replacement and vehicle maintenance fund. We are also proposing to shift revenues that are currently being accounted for in an undergrounding electric utility fund and shift that back to the general fund. As you may or may not know, we are currently receiving 2% from SCE, Southern California Edison, pursuant to a franchise agreement. One half of one of those percents has been accounted for and used to fund our underground and utility program. There's no restriction on those monies, and we are proposing that those monies be shifted back to the general fund to help with the shortfall.
I'm sorry, just for clarification for the public, there are two different kinds of funds when it comes to the Edison monies that we collect in funds. There's the funds that you are talking about actually are being used for the community or the neighborhood undergrounding of the individuals who want to collectively get together in a neighborhood and underground wires in their neighborhood, which would end up being an assessment at the end of the day on their property. However, what people are seeing along Cliff Drive, for instance, right now, what happened on Milpas, what will happen in the future, where the community benefits along large arteries for undergrounding, those are not the funds you're talking about. Those funds are kept in a separate fund, in a separate pot of money, and are used only and are earmarked only for those community benefits along arteries. Is that a fair statement or clarification?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Actually, the monies that right now we are collecting from, again, the 0.5%, we are using in combination with funds we receive from Edison and under, I think it was called the Rule 20A.
There's Rule 20A and Rule 20B.
And so I guess I'm not really sure how that complements that program, whether these are restricted. Maybe Jim could answer that question.
Yeah, the Rule 20B is not affected by what you're discussing here.
No, the only clarification I would make is that we are using a portion of these monies to assist private property owners with their service connections as a part of the project up on Cliff Drive. And so in the future, that if we shift this to the general fund, we wouldn't have those monies available to assist folks with the service connection part of a 20A project because you can't use 20A monies to do the service connections.
Okay, that's very important because it's a tremendous hardship on the individual property owners if the city decides, in conjunction with Edison, to go ahead and do a large project like the one that's going on Cliff Drive. They don't have a say-so particularly in it, and then they're visited with a large fee, which we are subsuming and using these monies for. So I would invite future councils and future endeavors in this area to be very cognizant and sensitive to the property owners' burdens when we do these very large and very community-oriented benefit projects. So.
Okay, if not further comments, go ahead, Bob.
Okay, and then the next two are, well, I'll talk one individually. The workers' comp rebates, as you know, we recently came to council and had recommended the use of some of those funds in the workers' comp program to assist in rebalancing their 2009 fiscal year. We had a deficit of about $2.5 million there. We are recommending that an additional $300,000 be used. Again, those are funds that have been accumulated over the last several years from essentially excess premiums paid by general fund departments as well as enterprise funds for the workers' compensation program. There's about a total $900,000 that's attributable to the general fund available. We're recommending $300,000 of that to be used to help solve this problem this year. We're also recommending transferring funds from the street sweeping fund, $100,000. Again, those are funds that that have been accumulated over time from revenues related to parking citations for people who are parking on the days that the streets are swept. Those revenues have exceeded over the last several years the cost of the program, which have generated excess funds, and we are recommending taking $100,000 of that money and bring it back into the general fund. It's a discretionary program, or at least a fund. It's not necessarily needed to be accounted for separately. It could have just as easily been part of the general fund. So it's really just decided we're going to move some of those back. It will still leave $200,000 in that fund as an operating reserve, which is about 20% of their overall budget. And then lastly, we were recommending using the general fund contingency account. We've always called this the appropriated reserve, but it's kind of a confusing term. We're now calling it a contingency account. There's about $700,000 that was created as part of the adopted budget for contingency, and we're proposing to use $512,000 of that to come up with the difference.
And the result of that would be for problems next year?
But we would have a couple $100,000 left this year until we decide how much we want to set up next year. There really isn't anything available next year for 2011. And this is a summary of the recommended adjustments, that $1.6 million by department. As you can see, that not every department was affected. As I indicated before, we were looking for where those opportunities were available, primarily vacant positions, and you can see that it's varied. The biggest impacts are going to be to the police department and Parks and Recreation department, where we had the most vacancies, and then Public Works as well. But you can see it just sort of varies by department. And we'll go through those individually, even though you've seen them. I'll go through them quickly, but I want to just finish first with a couple of the resolutions that we're proposing to amend. The first in the Parks and Recreation Department, they have, as you know, a comprehensive fee resolution for all their fees and charges for many, many programs. And that fee resolution historically has provided the Parks and Recreation Director to modify those fees during the year, rather than having them locked in at one point in time and for the entire year. It provides Ms. Rapp with some flexibility as demand changes throughout the year and conditions change. She can be more responsive to the programs and services and demands and adjust fees accordingly. The current adopted resolution did not include that authority. It was an oversight. It was included in previous resolutions, and we're recommending that it be included now. We're also recommending that this authority extend to golf fees and tennis fees. In the past, it had not included those two program fees. And then we just wanted to point out that it excludes the authority to make changes for fees related to arts and crafts shows. There's no need to make changes throughout the year for that, and so we're not proposing to include that authority in this resolution. And then the second item is in the library department. As you know, the City of Santa Barbara is part of a black gold library system, which allows for customers essentially to reserve books, put books on hold from whatever library that are part of the system. There are 6 libraries that are participating. And all libraries, with the exception of the City of Santa Barbara, charges a fee for reserving those books for juveniles. All other fees, all other types of materials are charged a fee. It's 50 cents per item per hold. The system was created and set up to charge a fee automatically, since all libraries do so. And so what it means is that because our fee resolution doesn't currently provide for a fee for juvenile materials, staff has to go into the system and manually delete those charges, and there are about 26,000 that are processed annually. And so we're recommending, library staff is recommending, to add that fee for juvenile holds into the resolution, which would help them and from a workload perspective, but also generate a nominal amount of revenues close to $7,300. So I'm going to go through these quickly because, again, we went through these before. These really haven't changed from the last time you saw them. The City Administrator's Office, $79,448. You can see that there was a new CalGrip grant that'll help fund the City Special Projects Manager, who will be allocating his time and working on that program. He's currently in the City Administrator's Office program, so he'll be charged out to this grant. That'll save $27,700. We're allocating 50% of the Employee Relations Manager to the Solid Waste Fund. This is I would call it a temporary measure for us to help and assist essentially me as a finance director in charge of the environmental services program to manage that operation. There's a new revenue from the water resources inside Santa Barbara. They're charging for some services there. That's $4,000. And then they're also going to reduce hourly support for special city TV programming by $7,000. In community development, you can see that they're going to be assigning a part-time planner to the Creeks project for 6 months. That's going to generate or allocate or save $24,460, since the Creeks projects are in a separate fund outside of the general fund. Proposing to suspend the board and commission stipends beginning in January, which will save $25,350 this year, and they're going to hold a position vacant, saving almost $67,000. In the finance department, we're going to leave the assistant finance director position vacant this year, which means that we made some adjustments to how much of that position's time was allocated to the solid waste fund in light of Christy Schmidt, the labor relations manager, being in charge of that now. And then we're going to reduce some miscellaneous line items. In the library, you can see that the large majority of the 167 is holding 3 positions vacant: a library assistant 2, a library tech, and a senior library technician. And you can see the revenues from the new 50-cent fee on juvenile material holds. In Parks and Recreation, I won't go through all these. You can see the biggest item is the first item holding 4 positions vacant: the business manager, grounds maintenance worker 1 and 2, and a pool maintenance technician. That will save $247,000. In police, there are 2 items. There's salary savings first for 6 months from 9 vacant positions. Those are vacancies that will generate about $500,000 through December 31st, at which time they will be sending folks to the police academy, but we'll have 6 months of savings for those positions. And then an actual add back to the budget is we had an animal control supervisor that's still going to be that was restored as part of the actions and counts by council in June. As a result of an oversight, we did not include the budget dollar for that position through April 2010, and that's $101,000 that we need to add back. The net of those two is $398,000 for the police department. In the Public Works Department, leaving a project engineer vacant will save $135,000. They're going to use hourly staff to fill a vacant survey technician, and that's going to save almost $41,000. And then they're going to reduce special projects for vector control and the leaking underground fuel tank program by $120,000. In the ICS funds, there's 2 funds that were impacted: facilities maintenance program and the fleet maintenance fund. Again, holding positions vacant in the facilities maintenance operation, totaling $87,238, and in the fleet maintenance fund, salary savings from a service rider that's going to be absent for 5 months. So that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I just had one question. Back on the library, maybe Irene could help. I thought we had talked about the 50-cent fee in a council meeting, or maybe it was finance. Can you refresh my memory on that, on the juvenile hold?
Yes. Good afternoon. That's on. Irene Macias, Library Director. Councilmember Horton, yes, we did bring this to council back in September, and the background is that all the Black Gold cooperative libraries are charging this fee now. It gets automatically added to a person's record. So that means the Santa Barbara library staff need to go in and manually remove that fee. And also, just in terms of, my preference would be that we would be an entirely free library and not charge for any services. When we do charge for certain services, it's generally to manage workload. We were faced with the possibility of having to increase the delivery service because of the high number of holds that were being placed throughout the system. So this was a way of managing the workload.
Okay, that's fine. Ms. O'Connor.
I have a question that
Can I, just to be clear on the library thing, I want to say one thing. And that is, council did look at this last June, and we had recommended this, and you didn't agree with that recommendation. So this does mean we're asking you to reconsider that decision you made last June.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question. Ms. Falcone.
So I have a question that involves the staffing at the police department. So between now and the academy, Chief, the academy's when?
January,
Begins in January,
late January.
late January, so February. Okay. Though the 6 months is not between now and February. How much of this time? My line of question goes to the academy takes how long? You're going to have a certain number of vacancies. You're calling it 6 months. Does that take into account the time that although we have to pay for their academy, and so there will be money going out, there still aren't bodies on the street. So you're going to be down 9 for a certain period of time, and you're going to not have bodies on the street. It takes 18 months until they're on their own. So if you could help me to understand and everyone to understand, I know that we have given you direction, very strong direction, to keep patrol staffed at 140, or at least that the coverage remain the same and not impact the community. How exactly do you envision this working? and this is not to put you on the spot, Chief, but this is really about making sure that you have the number of bodies that you need to cover the community the way we've asked you to.
Well, a clarification, we do not have 140 people in patrol. That's what you
I
alluded to.
misspoke, and you noticed I caught myself there, so I figured you'd clarify exactly what that was.
Currently, we're at full staffing in patrol. We're not quite at full staffing in the Detective Bureau, and we've moved some people around to make sure the patrol is covered. So when people call dispatch, we have ample enough people in black and white to answer their calls for service. Where we do not have them currently are in, as an example, beat coordinators are working patrol right now. We've spread some of the work around the patrol people to help with some of those community projects. But those BCs are working patrol. Our Police Activities League officer is working patrol. He's helping PAL, but his priority is patrol. But currently, and the Deputy Chief might have something to say, but currently we've never been in this great a shape in terms of people going to patrol briefings and answering calls for service. So we're fine there. But we've had to do other things to get us there because our number one mission is to answer the call for service in our black and whites. That does not mean that the other positions are not important. They certainly are, but that's not the number one mission.
My question goes to the future, though. What does this anticipated 9 vacancy, temporary vacancy, because we have asked you or given direction to put all 9 of these through the academy, should backgrounds all work out and blah, blah. And that takes a certain amount of time before they're in their own black and white on the street.
18 months
18 months, right.
before they're alone, yes.
Exactly.
Total.
From
the
day
time
one
From day one to
being alone.
yes.
Right. So my question really is, what does this do to your fully staffed patrol that you have currently? It can't possibly, I mean, the math just doesn't work to keep it status quo. So,
Well, patrol will forever be fully staffed, period. And if we have to wait 18 months to be able to then move those people back to their other duties, and that's what we're going to do. But we've committed, the staff is committed to never go, unless there's a terrible injury or something, illness, to never go below what we need in patrol, and we're not there.
these 9 vacancies, are they, do they exist today, or are they anticipated retirements?
No, they're existing today.
Okay.
And we have hired 2 of those people, of those 9 that we're hoping. I've hired 2 already, so they're ready to go. I have another interview this week for the 3rd. And we have other backgrounds that are still in process. So we may not get to 9, as you alluded to, depending on how the background ends up.
Well, we only want the best.
And that's why we may not get to 9.
I understand. I bring this up because although I understand all the need for the cuts and the moving around and so forth, this is the community's number one priority. And to hear that there are going to be 9 vacancies, I know has a ripple effect in the community and makes people nervous. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to clarify and give people confidence that we are doing everything we can to maintain a balanced budget, but not at the expense of safety.
Well, and we want to be transparent about it, but again, I think the community needs to be reminded that they're in good hands. We have enough people out there. What the community is not seeing, that's not affecting the service level, is the things that we've had to do in-house to make it happen, which means that we've spread the work around other people. We've asked people to do 2 or 3 duties. I have a lieutenant right now who's supervising our records unit, and he's also supervising community development, community services. And so we've spread it around. But that's something that the community really doesn't see. It hurts, and it spreads us very thin. But as long as we're at full staff and in patrol and investigating the crimes, I think the community is in good hands. And we're hoping that if we get to 9, which is our hope, that will really make us very, very happy.
That's why I've always maintained that you actually need more officers. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Ms. Schneider.
Chief, just to follow up, the 6-month salary savings is basically July 1 through December 31st,
Correct.
right? Okay. And so from what I heard you say is in the next 18 months, assuming we can get most or all of the 9 hired, then in 18 months it's bringing those people, you're keeping patrol at full strength and you're adding back things like DARE and the beat coordinators and other things, so to make it more full fleshed out, assuming there's no other changes in 18 months, which is a
And-
big if.
Yes.
Okay.
We're still doing DARE, so we have not eliminated that. We have taken people and moved them around, but again, the focus is patrol remains full staffing, and that's what we're committed to.
Okay. That's my question or statement about, but I think we've mentioned full staffing on sworn officers over and over again, so you know that message.
And
I
we appreciate it. You know, I think, yes, I have received that direction from Mayor and Council and direction from Mr. Armstrong that, you know, we certainly need to stay a full-service operation, and we are.
Yeah.
There are just some things that the community doesn't see that doesn't impact them, and that's okay with us.
And I agree that I'd rather have 7 excellent new hires than 7 excellent and 2 maybes. You know, and so after January, do we know when the next academy after that will be?
No, and the reason is that currently, in past years, over the last few years, we've sent our folks to the Ventura County Sheriff's Academy. They are not having a January academy because they are not hiring in the Ventura County Police Departments or the Ventura SO. We've taken a look at Hancock College to possibly send our folks there. Next Tuesday, we're visiting the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Academy to see if we're going to send them there. We have sent them to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Academy in years past, prior to me, when there were no academy classes in Ventura. And it looks to us right now that that's probably where we're going to end up sending them to the San Bernardino, which is quite a ways away.
Right.
But, you know, we have visited them. My staff and I visit them personally, and we not only want the best hires, we want the best training, and that's what we're going to do. And if it has to be San Bernardino in January, then that's where they'll be going.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question for Ms. Rapp about a couple of the vacant absent positions. The ground maintenance workers, as I remember from the presentation last September, when we were talking about what are the impacts of keeping some of these positions vacant, particularly the ones in the I think it was the ground maintenance workers, but correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's more parks maintenance. It had an impact on our IPM program, an integrated pest management program. Are these the same positions that we're talking about, or were those separate?
Good afternoon. The 2 positions are grounds maintenance workers 1 and 2. And so what the impacts will be is some of the landscaping maintenance in our parks in some specific areas, the closure of the 4 park restrooms, which we provided that information, happy to answer any additional questions. And we are also transferring the median maintenance from the park staff over to forestry so that that cost is covered by the UUT Streets Fund. So other than those impacts, we're not proposing at this time that there would be impacts to IPM. In general, we are experiencing challenges related to the maintenance, particularly of the weeds and looking at some of those areas. But I think more importantly will be the discussion of the areas where we have more responsibilities for vegetative fuels management.
Okay.
When we're talking IPM.
Okay, and that certainly can something into the next budget year we can get into, but I'm pleased to hear that we're not looking at changing green parks to yellow parks in the immediate future here with these changes. So
and as we move forward and make this work, we will have to take those discussions to the IPM committee
Right.
if in fact we were going to look at doing that, and it wouldn't be changing a green park to a yellow park. It would be portions of certain parks that we would choose to maybe treat a little differently than we had in the past
Great.
due to the less manpower.
I appreciate that clarification. And then just two other comments. You don't have to. The 50-cent fee, since Mr. Horton brought it up, I'm going to agree to this in terms of the budget adjustments, but I would recommend or suggest that perhaps, Ms. Macias, you can work with the Friends of the Library to see if there's some form of fundraising pool of money or something that if there is a hardship for parents who are getting multiple books or something like that, that there's a way to offset the fee or something like that. And I mean, we're talking $7,300, which in the grand scheme of the general fund budget is not a big deal, but it could be to some parents who, you know, are looking for specific children's books. And
I do want to
Macias?
say that the staff, the staff does make allowances if they see a child who desperately needs a book but realize that they don't have, you know, they will just waive the fee
Great.
right then and there as they place it.
I appreciate that, and you mentioning that. And then finally, I also want to concur with Councilmember Falcone on the utility underground funding, and in terms of future projects that are public projects and the funding that can't be used on 20A funds for the lateral, the property owner's fee, that somehow we need to memorialize that thought process. So when if there's a new public project come forward, that we, at least the new council, revisit that issue. So when we set the budget, we might want to reallocate some of the 20B money back to, into connection with that public project, since we cannot use 20A money for that, so we don't impose that fee. And I'm not quite sure, because I think the recommendation here is to permanently shift that 0.5% over to the general fund, which is fine because in the big picture of things. But when we're looking at a 20A project, I think we have to be cognizant of what the impact that might be to the neighbors right there. So I'm not quite sure if we need to put something in writing or say something at the council meeting later today, just so we don't forget about that, or if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, first, I think we only do these 28 projects every 5 to 10 years, and I think we've borrowed against future revenues for a while. So I think this issue probably won't come up for a while.
Right, and my point being, all the more reason why we want to say something now when we initiate this change, so we don't forget about it 5, 10 years
But I
from
think
now.
what you'll find is that because the service connection fee is always one of the big stumbling blocks to doing any undergrounding, that the issue will come up naturally because, when we did the Milpas project, for example, we didn't have this source of money at all. And then other monies became available, and they found monies to assist folks on those. And as I recall, I think they may have even done a special assessment where they allowed the people to pay them off over time.
I agree with Ms. Falcone. That
But
I think we need. I guess when the next 28, there's not going to be another 28 project for a while.
I
We
guess
have to pay
I
for
think
the
that's
current one.
I'm not sure you can commit a future council, but I think that clearly that will be an issue that when the next 28 project you do it, you're going to have to say how are we going to assist people with the service fees, because it's always it's basically the stumbling block that we have to get community buy-in on these projects.
Yeah, no, I agree. We can't commit a future council, but I think we can raise the issue just as an awareness piece, so it can be considered. So at least I think there might be concurrence here that we would at least raise the issue. But
Ms. Falcone?
thank you.
Yeah, I think that if, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a report from the Finance Committee later on today. Is this on today's agenda? Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, okay. Anyway, that this portion of the discussion, if it needs to be excised and rewritten to say that and community projects shall have no impact on the people who are being forced to reconnect, and memorialize it in some way like that, that we rework this to put that in, that we can't commit a future council, but we can say that there will be no individual impact to the homeowners. Well, we can. We can
or at least
excise
that's
this
our
piece,
intent in
pass-
terms of making this
pass
policy
the rest
change.
of it and excise this piece and have this come back for a separate resolution, or, I mean, Mr. Armstrong, it is something that needs to be not lost, because in future times, if it's up in the air, then people, I agree with you that it'll come up naturally, but if it's up in the air, then you have to have this discussion. There's no point in having this discussion if the community, over time, 2 projects now, because I know Grant House fought for this on Milpas Street, exact same thing. So to make it ambiguous, I think, is a disservice. So how do we fix that?
Jim, comment?
Well, again, when the Milpas project was done, this source of revenue wasn't even there. So they didn't use these monies to solve that problem. I'm not sure what monies they used. I imagine they used some other streets monies or some other project. It could have been general fund contributions.
I think
And
where the money comes from is irrelevant. That it doesn't impact the individual
Yeah.
is the point.
And I think you can express a level of concern, but I'm not sure that the council today can say, when we do a future 20A project, we want to make sure that we pay for the cost of the service connections. I just don't think you can commit that way. I think you can say that we think that these funds should be available in the future, kind of the intent of the council when we do the next 20A project, more of a statement of intent. But then clearly you're going to have to, when the project comes up and we define the project, you'll have to then appropriate the money to do it.
Okay, I have another question not related to any of this. Is that okay? Bob, some signs indicate that the economy might actually be picking up, although some say they don't. But in any event, should things turn around, how hard will it be to go back in and readjust?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, if things improve more quickly than we have kind of projected and factored into our revenue estimates, well, what we're going to be seeing is revenues better than we think, and we're going to see a favorable variance at the end of the year, and in addition to our reserves. It won't necessarily require that we make any more adjustments to the budget. We'll just see at the end of the year a better result than we had expected. I guess it's theoretically possible or practically possible that things could get worse, or we could see further declines beyond that we have already projected. At that point, I would say we would be more apt to come back to council at some time in mid-year, February, with some additional recommendations if it's a significant amount of money. But a faster recovery than we anticipated, we will just be all smiling and enjoying the benefits of that.
I'll be watching it on TV. Is there a motion from anyone?
I'll move this to council, and I'm sure since it's going to be on today's agenda, we can bring up the utility underground
Yeah.
issue.
And I'll second it, and
Great.
I'll ask a question of the attorney as to what our commitment level and opportunities are here.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Samario, further actions for today's committee?
Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Meeting adjourned.